Harrell.
So a friend of mine for years, I'm serious. A friend of mine for, I have friends. I'm serious. A friend of mine for years has been telling me that he thinks the Weather Channel, for example, has a financial incentive to make every storm like the worst ever so that people open up their free Weather Channel app on their phones. And every time that happens, there's a little ad that's going to populate at the bottom or top of your screen. Well, they're getting fractions of cents on that. And so, how many of you last week, when the tropical storm or Hurricane Barry or whatever it ended up being, was coming, did you look at the weather at all? Look at the storm. I did. I actually don't. I have the Weather Channel app, but I actually use this service called Windy, W-I-N-D-Y, especially for hurricanes, because you can get the app or you can, go to the website. It's really interesting stuff to see that. But anyway, the bottom line is this. So inevitably, when the left does, when there's a big weather event, the left can't help themselves. They always want to say that every weather event there is has something to do with climate change or global warming. I'll give you an example. Back when there were these terrible tornadoes several years ago that ripped through the state of Arkansas, ripped through great communities like Mayflower, great communities like Valonia. The Obama administration released their climate change report the same week that came out. And in that report, it talked about how, because of climate change and because of things like fossil fuels and carbon emissions, that weather is going to get worse. And I just thought to myself, it was essentially saying that if we would have controlled our carbon emissions in the past, then all those communities' homes would have still been standing. And that's preposterous. Like to actually think that you can scientifically be able to predict, something of that magnitude. The statistics involved, the math involved is just astronomical. Anyway, I want to introduce you again. Welcome back to the program. We've got Gregory Wrightstone on the line. He's the author of a book, Inconvenient Facts, the Science That Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know About. He's also a geologist with more than 35 years of experience researching various aspects of Earth's processes. Gregory, how are you this morning?
Oh, really good. Thanks for having me on again. It's a lot of crazy things out there in the climate change community.
It really is, and I know it's par for the course, right? I mean, I'm looking at this headline right here from theweek.com. How New Orleans flooding risks are exacerbated by climate change. Did you see that one?
I did, and you know what? There's a kernel of truth to it. Well, not climate change, but weather, and it's just opposite of what they're trying to say. It was exacerbated, and New Orleans dodged the bullet. And the reason they dodged the bullet was the Mississippi River was very, very high. And that was due to, recall all that flooding in the Midwest. The flooding in the Midwest was mainly driven by huge snowpacks, huge snowfall, and a very late cold spring that didn't allow the snow to melt. So when the spring rains came, it fell, melting the snow on still frozen ground. Instead of all that water falling like it normally does, a lot of it's sucked up by the ground and incorporated in the groundwater. Well, it didn't have anywhere to go except in the rivers, and they had terrible flooding, and that ended up heading down the Mississippi. So the Mississippi River, when the hurricane hit last week, had it been a little bit further east and they had gotten the brunt of the rain, New Orleans could have had some problems. It was exacerbated by the weather conditions, but it wasn't global warming. It was, and remember, it wasn't that many years ago that New York Times had a headline, "Is this the end of snow?" They were predicting a few years ago that the ski resorts and all the others would have to shut down because we weren't going to have any snow. So now, just opposite of that, we had a huge amount of snow throughout the north central United States in the winter and into spring, and then this late cold spring. So it's just opposite of what they're. And one of the things that's really interesting, I testified before the Pennsylvania Senate last month, along with meteorologist Joe Bastardi. I'm sure your listeners have seen and heard him, and his take is really good. He says, I'm paid to make accurate predictions. That's what I get paid for. He said, these guys, they never predict what's going to happen in the future. They just take credit for it after it happens no matter what it is. And he says if they were any good, they'd be saying, this is what will happen, and this is when it'll happen, and this is why. And they don't do it.
I don't think I've had you on. Maybe I have. I don't think I've had you on since the left got kind of obsessed with this. We've only got 12 years until the damage to the Earth is irreversible. You care to comment on that?
Yeah, well, we've heard this time and time again. In 12 years, they'll have another prediction that will be 12 years from now. The UN in 2005 predicted that there would be 50 million climate refugees by 2010. Of course, that didn't happen. We looked in the book. I capture what the population was of these most at-risk islands that they identified, and the population from 2005 to 2010 had skyrocketed. People were moving to the at-risk islands instead of fleeing from them. And then in 2015, the UN made the same prediction: 50 million climate refugees by the year 2020. I think you and I both know that that's going to be wrong too. But the key here is, Paul, that what they're predicting, what AOC, and I'm not sure about Arkansas. If you've got a climate action plan, many states are doing this. If Arkansas reduced 100%, and your listeners actually could go, I've got this on my website, inconvenientfacts.xyz. It's called the MAGIC Simulator, M-A-G-I-C-C. It's developed by the EPA, but I've listed and calculated, and I show here for every state, if they Arkansas reduced 100% of its CO2 emissions. Are you sitting down? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Because you might fall off I don't want you. So Arkansas, it would avert 1/1000th of a degree Fahrenheit by 2050, and 2/1000ths of a degree Fahrenheit by 2100. How many jobs lost is that worth? It is measured in thousandths of a degree. It's well below anything we can even measure, and that's what they're talking about. These people with this Green New Deal, the Paris Climate Accord. What's their goal? What's their main goal? Their main goal is to alter the temperature of the Earth, is it not? Isn't that their primary objective?
Yes.
And they think they can do that. And when we say it, you never hear it stated like that. But when you state it like that, you go, really? We can do that? And they would be asking the people of Arkansas to make terrible sacrifices, increase their energy cost. Increase the energy cost would drive everything else, the cost of everything else up, for nothing. For something that's so close to zero, it's hard to tell it from zero. So it's crazy. And that's, I think, the big component that we've missed in this whole argument is, okay, if we do reduce CO2, what will that do to the Earth's temperature? And if we look, even if the United States reduced its 100% of its CO2 emissions, it would only reduce the temperature of the Earth. This is using the EPA's own calculations, by 7/100ths of a degree Fahrenheit by 2050. 7/100ths of a degree Fahrenheit by 2050 is what we would do by doing this. We can't do it, of course.
And let me just even challenge that. How do we know that their math is right, even on that prediction?
Well, we don't. But what I did, I agree with you that I'm very skeptical of the models where they've been proven not wrong. But in this case, I said, okay, I'll accept that your models are correct, and and what I've done on my smartphone app that we have, you can get that at the App Store or Google Play. Just search for Inconvenient Facts. I've got this calculator that you can plug in, and what I've done is actually used their own calculations to figure this out. And it's the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas-induced climate change, and it was created by the National Center for Atmospheric Research. What I've done is actually use their own calculations by the EPA and this other group, and I've put this into the smartphone apps. You can see, even using their calculations that you and I probably both agree that are inflated, even using their calculations, the amount of warming is incredibly small that we would be able to affect.
So, I think what we're kind of getting at here is, I think it's advantageous. If they're going to make accusations that say we only have 12 years, then, I got no problem on my side saying, you guys think you can control the weather. That's what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, and yet we have people, millennials or younger than that, who legitimately believe. I mean, I know AOC came out and said, "Oh, I was just speaking, I wasn't being serious." But then they did a poll, and most Democrats do think we only have 12 years left, and it's really sad that we've got so many people buying into this nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I think we last talked. It might have been 9 months or more ago.
Yeah.
And if you don't recall, my big thing that I talk about, I'm traveling around the country. I'll be speaking in Wilmington, North Carolina next week, along with Beaufort, South Carolina, and Myrtle Beach, and then on to Wichita the following week. When I talk, my big thing I talk about is how rising temperatures and increasing CO2 are benefiting the Earth and humanity, and it ain't even close. It's not even close. Everything, if you look at the big things that they're predicting to go wrong, their predictions of forest fires, droughts, heat waves, and the like, these are based on failed climate models that overpredict warming by 2.5 to 3 times too much. What I do is I look at, okay, well, what's actually happening? Not what speculation of what might happen based on these failed climate models. What's actually happening? And we see what's actually happening is an Earth that's thriving, prospering, and greening. According to NASA, up to 50% of the Earth is what they call greening. In other words, vegetation's increasing. Less than 4% of the Earth is what they call browning, or a loss of vegetation. That's a pretty good trade-off. I'd take that any day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's what and if you look on the back of my SUV, I've got a bumper sticker that says "I heart CO2." I'm a huge proponent of the many benefits of CO2 increase. Mm-hmm. And even if we look at carbon dioxide levels through time, the plants that we rely on for everything on Earth surviving, basically on these plants that developed over 100 million years ago, first evolved. CO2 levels were 2,500 parts per million at that time. They're 400 today. We've decreased almost linearly 2,000 parts per million of CO2 in that time. Since the Industrial Revolution, it's gone up 130 parts per million. So we've decreased 2,000, and they're worried about 130 part per million increase. It's the fact of the matter is that we don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. We're actually CO2 impoverished. And many of your listeners have probably never heard that. There's a chilling chart that I capture in the book and on my app, this 140 million year decline of CO2, where we almost crossed what I call the line of death, which is 150 parts per million, where plant life can't survive. Now, that's a climate apocalypse if we ever got there.
Absolutely. Wow. His name, folks, is Gregory Wrightstone. He's the author of Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. You just heard some of it right there. Gregory, man, I appreciate you coming back on. I want to do it again soon, and I don't want it to be 9 months.
All right. Very good. Thanks.
Okay.
And sleep well. You're not ruining the Earth.
Okay. All righty. We will. Thank you so much. Gregory Wrightstone, everybody.